All right, thanks for that introduction. As Alex said, I joined Klarna about a year ago, and I joined on the Panda team. When I joined that team, they're sitting in the back over there, they did something called mob programming, which I had never heard of before. Basically, 4 people sit at a table, and they all look at one screen, and they discuss how to write the code. When we work in such close proximity to each other, and we're working with different teams from other parts of Klarna, I found that we had some conflicts. I often felt marginalized, or maybe I should say I sometimes felt marginalized, and I got really frustrated. I thought to myself, how can I make this better? Instead, I think what I actually did was maybe yell a little bit or get angry or something like that. But my team came up with this rubric. I had to fill in the blanks here. When you do this, it makes me feel like this, and if you were instead to do this, it would make me feel like this. So this is like what the speaker this morning was saying. You need to have solutions. You can't just be angry about stuff. So anyway, the solution to all of these problems is actually this talk. So this talk will hopefully give you some simple, concrete things that you can do to be a better ally, to help that person on your team or in your group feel less marginalized. Okay? So let me give you a quick introduction to myself. My name is Beverly. I'm American. My ancestors are Chinese. I grew up, though, in Southern California, right by Disneyland. That's where my parents still live. I went to college in Oregon at Reed College, which is where Steve Jobs went, and I worked at the nuclear reactor there. I then went to grad school at the University of Chicago, where I did breast cancer research. I did research in Texas, I did research in New York, and then finally I switched over to software engineering and moved to San Francisco. And then last year moved to Sweden for this job at Klarna. Okay, so through all those things that I've done, this is the percentage of women in each of those things. And you can see in many of the things that I've done throughout my life, I've been the only woman on those teams. At Klarna, you can see the percentage of women in engineering is about 13%. All right, so because there are so few women in the things that I've done, I've made it a point to be an advocate for women in tech. And to do that, I've been a mentor for women at the Hackbright Academy, which is a coding boot camp in San Francisco that teaches women how to program in Python and JavaScript. I also planned some talks that help motivate women and teach them how to negotiate and how to deal with things like impostor syndrome, which is the feeling that you're not good enough for the job that you're doing. I actually hosted an impostor syndrome workshop at Klarna a few months ago. Okay, so what's in this talk? This talk is going to be 3 parts. First, I'm going to give you some definitions. What is an ally? Second, I'm going to give you some concrete steps on how you could be an ally. And lastly, I'm going to tell you how to kick ass at it. So first, what is an ally? I'm going to go over these 4 terms and give you a definition with an example for each one. I'm going to do the first 3 on the bottom and then tell you what an ally is using those terms. So first, privilege. Privilege is an unearned advantage that is given to some people, but not all people. An example would be talking without getting interrupted. If you find that you talk and nobody interrupts you, you are very privileged. Because not all people have this situation. Some people are target or marginalized people. They are people who suffer from oppression, which I'll define in a second. In the example, it's somebody who constantly gets interrupted. The next point will drive this home, I think. Oppression, in this talk, I'm going to use it to mean systemic inequality in society, which benefits people who have privilege and does not benefit people, which harms people who have less privilege. So the example here is, let's say on TV and in movies, on the news, you see that women get interrupted all the time by their coworkers or by the other people in the scenes. And you start to think it's normal. Okay, it might be normal to interrupt women, so I'll interrupt the women in my own life. And you start to see it all over the place. That's what we're going to call oppression in this talk. So an ally is somebody who has privilege, who is trying to understand their own privilege, and lastly, who is working to end oppression. So in this example, it's somebody who notices that women get interrupted all the time, so tries not to interrupt them themselves, but also tries to encourage other people not to interrupt women, because that's the only way we're going to get better, is if we spread this knowledge and tell other people. All right, so if you want to be an ally, I've broken it down to kind of 2 easy steps. Like, 1, you have to notice that this thing is happening, something that's happening that's making someone feel marginalized. And then 2, you need to try to do something about it. All right, so the nice thing is that everybody can be an ally. If you notice that somebody is being marginalized, there's a target group that is being oppressed, and you are not part of that target group, you can be an ally for that group. But today's talk is going to focus on being an ally for women in tech. I apologize if the title was misleading, but I myself am a woman in tech, and I feel comfortable giving you examples from my own life, and I feel less comfortable giving you examples from things that I understand less. But you should keep in mind that some of the tips I'm showing you today can be used for being an ally for other groups of marginalized people. Okay, as an aside, I'm not saying that men are more sexist just because I think women need allies in tech. And I want to walk you through a simple thought experiment to show you why, even though I don't think men are more sexist, I still think this is a problem we need to talk about. So I'm going to go through this example here. So in a population of 10 people here, there are 5 women on the right, 5 men on the left. I'm only showing 2 genders here because the study talks about 2 genders. I recognize that there are more than 2 genders. Across the population, let's say that 20% of people are sexist. So I'm showing them as purple here. So now, equally men and women are sexist here. I'm not saying men are more sexist. This is what a sexist remark is going to look like. Here's a sexist remark. That's what 2 looks like. If this kept on going, you can see that men and women are equally feeling the sexism in the room, and it might not be a problem. I mean, it's a problem if there's sexism, but at least it would be equal for men and women. The assumptions I'm making here again is that 2 genders, sexist statements cannot be made to people of the same gender, and sexist statements are equally distributed among the targets. Okay, so if this were to keep on going on, again, like I said, it would be equal, but this is not what the tech industry looks like. I showed you the percentages before. It probably looks more like this, right? So in 20 men here, 4 of them are going to be sexist. Okay, so if everybody made 1 sexist comment, it would look like this. And if 20 sexist comments are made, it would look like this. I didn't actually draw all 20 arrows from each man because there would be too many arrows. So here's a simplified version just so you can see it a little more clearly. Each man is getting 1 sexist comment that he's hearing, and each woman is getting, we could do the math here, 4 men times 20 comments is 80, divided by 5 women, that's 16 sexist comments that each woman is hearing. And this is called the Petri multiplier, so you saw it in the corner there. What it says is that for an n-to-1 gender ratio, in this case 4-to-1, there's a 1-to-n squared experience ratio. So that each woman is feeling a 16 times more sexist remarks than each man who's in this example here. So again, the men are not more sexist in terms of percentage across the population, but the women in the group are feeling it more, and that's why it's something that we need to do something about. All right, so why do we need allies? Like, why don't I just fix the problem myself? Well, there are more of you. So if there are more men, there are more of you to help change the environment. 2, as a person with privilege, you often have more power to do something about it. Target people or marginalized people often don't have the power to make these changes. And lastly, when target people are trying to make changes that benefit themselves, it tends to look very selfish. Right, a pregnant woman asks for a pregnant parking space. It looks like you're just asking for your own parking space. But if you are asking for somebody else, it actually looks very empowering. It looks like you're helping other people. And I have an example here from a study from 2016. They wanted to see whether diversity valuing behavior, and diversity valuing behavior means hiring and promoting women and people of color. They wanted to see if that affected performance ratings. So they measured this on 350 leaders from different companies, and they asked their bosses and their peers to rate their performance. And of the people who did not do diversity valuing behavior, they got some rating. Okay, so those are men and women. So then you have men and women who did some diversity valuing behavior, and for the men, they actually had higher ratings. People thought that they performed better than the men who didn't do diversity valuing behaviors. But for the women, they actually had a lower rating. So people saw women leaders who were doing diversity valuing behaviors as performing less well. So this is an argument for why we need people to be allies for women in tech, because they can't do it themselves without hurting their own careers and reputations. All right, so let's move on to the second part, how you can be an ally. I'm going to do this in 5 steps. The first 3 steps will be very concrete. It'll be examples that I've seen in the office, and then things that I think you can do to help out in those situations. Steps 4 and 5 will be a little bit more general so that you can help try to prevent these things from happening in the first place. And all these things are about being allies. I've made it very simple. Here's a key for how difficult these different concrete actions are. Level 1, level 2, and kick ass. So let's go. Number 1 is to use the right terminology. You should not use the word girls. For women who are 18 years old and older, they are women. One exception to this is people from the marginalized groups can call themselves whatever they want. So you've seen Girl Geek or Pi Ladies. Women who are in their own groups can use whatever word they want. You shouldn't use the word females for humans, and you should not use the word guys for groups that are not all men. And I know a lot of people use the word guys. I heard it all morning in the talks this morning. And I also wanted to point out that if you're not a native English speaker, when you were learning English, you maybe even wondered, you asked somebody, is the word guys gender neutral? Can I use it for men and women? And an English speaker maybe told you yes, because they themselves use it in that way. But just because we have been doing it doesn't mean it might be the right thing to do. So I'm going to give you some examples here, and maybe I can convince you that we should stop using this word for groups that are not all men. So I want you to think about the answer in your head as I go through these. This is Marie Curie, winner of multiple Nobel Prizes. That blank is measuring some chemicals. I probably wouldn't say guy. I think I would say woman here. I don't think I ever would point at one woman and say guy. That blank is holding 2 babies. I mean, I'd probably say man, but you're welcome to say guy if you want. I think that would be okay. These blank are all Fortune 500 CEOs. This was one where I asked some people, and they said that they really would use the word guys, but I'm telling you, as a native English speaker, if I see a bunch of women and I had to say these blank, I would say these women. These women are all Fortune 500 CEOs. Okay, so we got four people here, and they're all women. Let's add one more person to that. So these blank are all Fortune 500 CEOs. Somebody pointed out it's still women, but okay. It's assuming that he is one of these. Okay, so it probably wouldn't be guys, though. I mean, 4 women were women. 4 women plus a guy, that's not a bunch of guys. That's a bunch of people. These people are all Fortune 500 CEOs. All right, so then I went around and asked the Women Do Tech channel. I also wanted to point out, if you're a woman in this audience and you're not in the Women Do Tech channel, send me an email after this and I'll add you. It's a private Slack group. And what this person said on the channel was she felt really uncomfortable when somebody came up to their team and said, I need a guy from your team to help us do this. And she sat there going, I feel really left out. This person doesn't want me to help. This person wants a man on my team to help them. And so really, you should say person here. I need a person from your team to help us do this. And this could also bleed into HR, because we've heard around the office people say, we need to hire a back-end guy. And when you start saying that, it just plants in the minds of the interviewers that we're trying to hire a man. So instead, you should say, we need to hire a back-end person or a back-end developer. All right, if none of that convinced you, you could try reading this. How many guys have you slept with in the past year? And I bet most of you would probably translate this to mean men, right? I don't think any of you are giving me answers that mean men and or women. Okay, if none of those things convince you, okay, if somebody is uncomfortable with something, like someone tells you, I don't like being called men, I don't like you calling our group men, can't we just try to make them feel more comfortable and use a different word? I think that's very simple. And that's not just this, but anything. Okay, so to summarize here, use people or everyone or y'all or some other word. I heard that the SKSO team says you can call their group everyone or ladies, because the group has agreed that that's okay. Okay, so again, to be an ally, notice that something's happening, do something about it. In this case, notice what you're saying. Are you saying the word guys all the time to mean a group of different people? Are you using the word girls instead of women? And then try to use the right words. If you want to be a level 2 ally, try to encourage other people to do the same. If you hear other people doing these things, maybe ask them to do it as well. Ask them to use the right terminology. Okay, well, you're wondering, like, oh, what if I mess up? Okay, I'm going to try to use the right words, but what if I say the wrong thing? Well, just apologize and correct yourself and move on. If you're trying to make an effort, I think people will see that you're trying to make an effort, and that's a good thing. All right, step number 2 is include. I know that this has happened a few times to me where I'm in a group of developers and I'm the only woman. Someone's explaining something, and for some reason, they can't look at me. So I'm going to give you a specific example here. All right, so this is a disclaimer here. Everybody in this picture was not involved in the actual misogynistic event. Okay, and so the way we do interviews at Klarna, when we had the tech pool around, was 2 Klarnauts would interview one person who's not from Klarna. And so I did this interview. It was myself and an engineer who was a man, and we interviewed a man. And so I would ask a question of the interviewee, and he would give his answer to my colleague. And this kept happening throughout the whole interview. So what are you supposed to do? Well, the first thing is, I hope you notice that this happens. If you're the man who's interviewing the situation, do you notice that the person is not looking at your colleague? I think it's important. That's the very first step. Do you notice that it's happening? 2, do something about it. I have a suggestion here, because the person that I was with did notice that it was happening. And the way he tried to solve it was the candidate looked at him, so he looked at me. And I think that made the candidate feel really uncomfortable, so he started looking at me as well. So here, one thing you can do to be an ally is to try to get that person to look at the person who's not being included. And this is not just in interview situations, but in any sort of meeting you have, right? If you have a stand-up, if you have a group meeting, if you have any kind of meeting with lots of people. All right, if you want to level up, why don't you try to improve the interview process so you can tell if someone can work with women? Like in this situation, a woman was interviewing, but what if there are 2 men interviewing someone? How would you know? As I think it's an important thing that we need. Number 3 is to amplify. And when I say amplify, I mean amplify the voices of people who may be quieter or just not heard at all. Let me just go through the example. Again, this is a reenactment. Okay, so this actually has happened a few times where, okay, maybe someone says an idea. We should do X, Y, Z. Here I'm saying it, so I'm saying, okay, the woman or someone who's quiet on the team says this, and maybe nobody hears it. Just silence afterwards, or they move on to another topic, or even that's not going to work. It just gets shut down right away. Then 5 minutes later in the meeting, all of a sudden, like, someone has magically the same idea. And this time, it's like, that's a great idea now, okay? Thanks, Martin. That's, like, the best idea. Okay, so again, to be an ally, first, you got to notice that it's happening. Have you seen this happen on your teams? If you haven't, try to pay attention. Like, do you see this happening? And then what do you do about it? Well, I have a suggestion here. You can give credit to that person who said it first. If you notice that it happened, you could say, hey, that person said it earlier. Or even if you thought it was a good idea, later on in the meeting, you can say, hey, that person said this, let me just say it again. So amplify what they're saying. All right, so you can level up to be a level 2 ally if you can find a way to get your team to like just listen to everybody the first time around. I'm not actually sure how you do this, but maybe it's just like changing the culture. It's up to you. Okay. Number 4, you can make some social rules on your team, and the social rules can help you just kind of avoid having these problems in the first place. I'm going to give you some examples from a group called Recurse Center. So this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I did this program in New York, and it used to be called Hacker School. It's not a boot camp. It's for people who already know how to program. It's like a writer's workshop for programmers. So we sat around in these rooms, and we kind of worked on open source projects, kind of took deep dives into languages, learned lots of things. We had visitors, like this is the founder of the Julia language, telling us about how he developed the language. The main thing I really liked was it was a nice place to learn. It was a nice place to ask questions and not feel like you're going to be judged. Here's something I found in my Facebook profile. This is probably the very first pairing station I ever used, and I had to ask somebody, like, what is that? And so Greg explained it to me, and it was fine. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of the social rules that Recurse Center had that made it a nice learning environment. So the first one is feigning surprise. So you might be sitting around with your friends, and all of a sudden the topic of bash comes up because, I don't know. Okay, and then somebody says, what's bash? Somebody else in the room says, you don't know what bash is? That's called feigning surprise. The person's not actually surprised, or maybe they are, but in any case, it's not good to say those sorts of things because all it does is make this other person feel bad. The other person's thinking like, was I supposed to know that? Oh, I must be stupid. Everybody else here knows this and I don't know this. So it's a nice social rule because it makes it so that people don't feel bad about asking when they don't know things. So instead of saying, you don't know what bash is, why don't you teach the other person? And then they learn, and then everybody feels good. Recurse Center rule number 4 is no subtle isms. What is an ism? Things like this. They're remarks that are made to a person that criticizes or says something negative about something that they can't change about themselves. Sex or race or class, one of those things. So those things are not allowed. How do you know what's sexist and what's racist? Like, what if you tell a joke, you didn't think it was sexist, but somebody else was offended? Well, that's why this rule makes sense. Like, to have the social rule means that somebody can raise their hand and point it out, and it won't be considered like, I'm not making a criticism about the person, I'm just saying you broke a rule. And then, I just tell you, and then you apologize and you move on. The reason why you have a social rule is as a group, we agree that we don't want to do these bad things, and so it just makes it a lot less stress in order to have a nice environment. All right, you could try to make some social rules for your own team. After the talk, if you have questions about Recurse Center, I'm happy to talk about the rest of their rules with you. All right, step number 5 is to notice when you're being biased. I have a lot of suggestions here, but first, let's take this test. So I need everybody to participate here. You can stay seated. There's this study that was done by some Harvard scientists called the implicit association test. And they wanted to see if people were biased for a number of different things. We're going to take the one that's about men and women and family and career. So here are a bunch of words on the screen. I don't need you to memorize them. I just need you to see that some of them are women's names, some are men's names, some belong to kind of like family type things, and some are career words. Okay? So what I need you to do now is I'm going to put a word on the screen. I'm going to put a bunch of words one at a time. I want you to raise your left hand. I guess I'll do the mirror image. Raise your left hand if it's a woman's name or family word, and raise your right hand if it's a man name or a career word. I'm going to put them in the top corner so you can remember which one is which. Okay? I'm just going to step through these, and I want you to actually raise your hand. Okay? Okay, so now I'm going to switch them. So your left hand is for a man's name or a family word, and your right hand is for a woman's name or a career word. Okay, ready? I'm going to put them on the top. Ready? Go. I wish I were videotaping you from this side. Sorry, Jim, I didn't know you when I made this slide deck. Okay, what was the whole point of that? Okay, so if you go on the website, you can Google IAT after this or go to this website at Harvard. They'll actually measure your response times, and you'll see if you're biased, you'll do one of them faster than the other. So we did one set and then we swapped them, right? You'll see that you're faster at one or the other, and they find that most people are actually faster when we pair women and family, men and career. That's just a bias that a lot of people have in society. Okay, I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Okay, so we're trying to notice our bias, right? You can notice if you use different words to describe men and women. Let's say you have a man and a woman, they both behave the same way, but she's bossy and he's assertive. You can notice when you're doing that. Lastly, I have this one example here about people who are trying to be unbiased, but then end up being biased anyway. So just bear with me here. This study was done on 90 grad students, maybe students. They were all men, and they were asked to pick one resume, like who are you going to give the job to? So they were shown 2 resumes, and one had more education, one had more experience, but they were about equal. And they find that 75% of them would choose the one with more education. That's what they hypothesized. These are all students, so obviously, they want to hire someone who's just like them. Okay, so they tend to hire the one who has more education. Then they put names on them. So they divide the group into 2. These ones get these ones. The other ones get them swapped. All right, so they asked them, who would you hire here? 75% of them still hire the man, or still hire the one with more education, and they give the excuse, well, he's got more education. All right, so then one group gets the one that's swapped, right? The one that has more education is now the woman. Oh, again, sorry, I'm only showing 2 genders because the study itself talks about 2 genders. They find that only 43% want to hire the person with more education when that person is a woman. So I guess in this case, John gets hired. And they tell themselves, well, I picked that one because he has more experience. So the person who's doing this selection here, well, I'll hire this person when he has more education, I'll hire this person because he has more experience, that person feels totally unbiased. Like, I make these decisions because it's a rational decision. That's why I gave the job to that person. But you can see that it's not actually that rational. Okay, so we figured out we're biased. All humans are maybe a little bit biased. How do you become unbiased? Well, I'm not sure if you actually can, but you can do things to try to reduce your bias in the actions that you take, the decisions that you make. Here's one example. My friend Bob plays French horn in the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, and this is how they do their auditions. So there was a study that was done a while back that showed that when they hired trombone players, if they look at the person auditioning, they tend to hire fewer women, because people expect trombone players to be really big guys. And if they're not a big guy, they tend not to hire them. So they started using these screens, so you can't actually see who's playing the instrument. And then they find they hire more women. But then they found that the woman walks in on her high heels and then plays the trombone, and they can still tell it's a woman. And so I asked my friend Bob. He said they use carpet now. So another thing you can do if you are involved in recruiting, you can try to remove the pictures and the names from the resumes that you see. Now, eventually, the person will come in for an on-site, and it's obvious if it's a man or a woman or another gender person. But I built this Chrome extension so you could just wipe out the pictures and the names on hired.com and replace them with robot pictures and random words. It doesn't work anymore because the selectors change on hired.com, which is really ironic because that's what I work on now. I thought this quote was interesting in a book that I read. Our struggle today is not to have a female Einstein get hired. It's for a normal woman to get as quickly promoted as a normal man. Think about that next time you're thinking about that for your own work. All right, lastly, how to kick ass at being an ally. Just do it. Just any of the things that I've said. If you just help participate in this, I think we'll make a better environment. But if you want some actual tips on things that you can do, fix gender equality in our society. It's like super boss level allyship. Okay, one thing you actually can do in your own life if you have kids, raise your kids not to be biased. Like we just said earlier, you probably can't become unbiased, but your kids are kind of like blank slates. So if you raise them to just respect everybody, men and women equally, hopefully they'll grow up to be as unbiased as possible. And lastly, I have 2 very specific examples. In Norway, the male and men and women's football teams just signed an equal pay agreement so that next year they'll start getting paid equally, which is a nice example, I think, for young people and just everybody in general. Lastly, when I became a software engineer, I signed this agreement. So in the United States, healthcare doesn't come with the government. The government doesn't provide healthcare. Your company provides it to you. And some companies actually don't include trans people in their non-discrimination policies and healthcare. So this agreement said, I'm not going to help you with recruiting, unless you include those things in your agreement. And this is an example of a grassroots initiative that some of us maybe could even do today, maybe not for this, but for just think of something else to be an ally and start something. All right, so in summary, there were 5 steps I gave you. 1, use the right terminology. 2, include everybody in the group you're talking to. 3, amplify the voices of people who are quieter. 4, make social roles. And 5, notice your bias. Now I want you to take a second here and look at this list and maybe just pick one that you want to make a commitment to try to do in the future. I'll give you a second to think. Or you can look at the slides later on. I think they're making a recording. Okay. In conclusion, all of us here are privileged, and all of us can be an ally. And to be an ally, you've got to notice that it's happening, something's happening, and you've got to do something about it. I want to thank some people. Everybody who came to my practice talks, everybody who was in my demo photos, Mariana for taking all the photos, and my mentor, Alex, who reminded me when things were due and helped me make my talk really great and just general motivated me. He's kick-ass. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. And, well, here's a little something from the organizers. Man, this is heavy.
It's heavy, okay.
Oh, okay. So, thank you very much again.
I also wanted to take a selfie.
Oh,
Hold on.
a selfie. Okay. You applaud.
Okay,
you
everybody applaud. Okay, okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I'm not taking any questions, but if you want to come find me afterwards, I'm happy to answer your questions. Thanks.